Good evening, my dear ones. My name is Lizzie Bishop. Some call me a storyteller. Others say I'm just an old woman who's seen too much. But I know the truth. I carry tales that are not meant to fade with the night. Stories that cling to you, that breathe down your neck long after the lights go out. This channel is not about happy endings. It is about the shadows we walk past every day and the people who live inside them. So tonight, sit very still, lock your doors, and listen closely, for what I am about to share is not a campfire story meant for children. It is something far more unsettling, a tale of laughter that wasn't laughter, knocking that wasn't knocking, and strangers who were not what they seemed. Now, let me take you back to a campground where 4 young souls thought they were safe, until the night proved them wrong. The cabin sat quiet beneath the canopy of pines, their windows glowing faintly like the last embers of a dying fire. Beyond them stretched the campground road, swallowed in a tunnel of black, where the trees bent low as if they were listening. That Saturday night, 4 teenagers stepped into that darkness. Chloe led the way, her flashlight beam quivering across the dirt like a nervous finger pointing. Behind her came Madison, clutching her towel tight. Ethan walked slow, steady, pretending not to notice his younger brother Ryan pressing close at his side. The fire they had left behind crackled faintly in the distance, but each step farther from the cabins bled the warmth out of the night. Out here the air grew damp and heavy, carrying the smell of pine needles and the faint rot of old leaves. They weren't afraid at first, not really. They joked about the walk, about how the woods looked like something out of a horror movie. Their laughter rang too loud, too sharp, a sound that fought against the silence, but never seemed to win. Ahead, the shower house loomed out of the shadows, 2 rows of stalls facing one another like hollow eyes in a concrete skull. The building had no welcome, no hum of electricity, just the faint drip of water echoing from somewhere inside. They split up without much thought. Ethan and Ryan slipped into the farthest stalls at the end of one row, while Chloe and Madison vanished into doors nearby. Metal hinges groaned as the locks slid into place, shutting them each in their own narrow cell. And then the silence came, a heavy, unnatural silence, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Ethan tilted his head. The water pounded against the tiles, masking smaller sounds, but something tugged at his senses, something just beyond the hiss of the shower. It began as a single strike, sharp, deliberate. Knock! The sound rattled his door, jolting through the steam. "Occupied," he called out, forcing bravado into his voice. But the silence that followed was wrong, too patient, too deliberate. Then it came again, not at his door this time, but at the stall beside him. And then another, a ripple of knocking traveling down the row like invisible hands testing, searching, asking without words, "Who is in there?" The water could not drown it out now. It grew louder, closer, each strike echoing like a heartbeat against cold concrete walls. And Ethan knew, whoever stood outside wasn't just passing by, they were choosing. The first knock had been enough to raise the hair on Ethan's neck, but the second, the third, the rhythm of it was wrong. Not playful, not impatient, but measured, calculated. Ryan shut off his water, pressing his ear to the stall wall. "Ethan, do you hear that?" His voice trembled, barely louder than a whisper. Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to lie, to calm his little brother, but the sound answered for him. Knock, knock, knock. A deliberate parade of fists, traveling one door at a time, moving down the row. Each strike echoed through the tiled chamber until it seemed to crawl inside their skulls. In the stall across from them, Chloe's voice cracked. "Madison? Was that you?" But Madison had already gone still, clutching her towel like armor. "No," she hissed. "It's not me." The silence that followed pressed heavy against them, the kind of silence that waits, that watches. And then, almost mockingly, the knocking resumed, this time faster, harder, as though whoever stood outside had grown impatient. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He pictured some faceless figure drifting between the stalls, dragging their knuckles across the doors like a butcher testing cuts of meat. Each bang was a question, each pause an invitation. He forced himself to speak, his throat dry. "Who's out there?" No answer. The water hissed and steamed, but beyond it, the air thickened with intent. Someone was there, someone listening, someone deciding. Ryan's voice cracked. "Maybe it's just other campers." Before he could finish, a new sound sliced through the air. Not a knock this time, but the scrape of footsteps on gravel just beyond the door. Slow, deliberate steps circling the building, dragging the night along with them. Madison whimpered. Chloe cursed under her breath, and Ethan felt it too, the terrible certainty that whoever lingered outside wasn't wandering. They were searching. Minutes stretched thin. Finally, Ethan unlatched his stall, stepping out with his towel clutched to his chest. Steam billowed behind him like smoke. He lifted his headlamp and swung the beam toward the exit, only to find nothing but the black outline of the shower house door. No figures, no footsteps, no sound at all. But Ryan pointed, his hand shaking. "The car," he whispered. Ethan followed his gaze. Through the crack in the door, just past the edge of light, sat a vehicle that hadn't been there before, parked close, engine off, windows black as tar. The realization sank deep and cold. Whoever had been knocking hadn't wandered away. They were waiting. The four of them gathered at the center of the shower house, voices low, trembling. Chloe pressed her phone to her chest, muttering that she couldn't get a signal. Madison's eyes darted from door to door, as though expecting hands to burst through at any moment. And then the hinges groaned. Not their stalls this time, but a stall across the row, one that no one had entered. The door creaked open, slow, deliberate, and two figures stepped out, a man and a woman. They moved in eerie unison, black clothes clinging wet against their skin. Drops of water ran down their sleeves and pant legs, but their hair, perfectly dry, styled, unnatural in its precision. Ethan's mouth went dry. They hadn't been showering at all. The woman turned first. Her eyes found theirs and held them in a stare too blank, too hollow. Then her mouth split open in a laugh, low, throaty, scraping at the edges of sanity. The sound bounced off the walls, echoing and bending until it seemed to come from everywhere, at once. The man said nothing. He only watched. His gaze flicked between each of them, measuring, weighing. And when his eyes lingered on Ryan, the youngest, the smallest, Ethan felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Chloe forced a smile, a desperate attempt at normalcy. She lifted her hand in a weak wave, but the woman's laugh only grew sharper until it broke off as suddenly as it began. Together they walked to the exit. The man opened the door with mechanical calm, the woman stepping past him but never breaking eye contact. Even as they crossed the gravel toward their waiting car, she kept glancing back, her head tilting unnaturally, her stare dragging across them like a knife across glass. The 4 teens stood frozen, not speaking, not breathing. The car door slammed shut. The engine roared to life. Yet even as the vehicle pulled away, the woman twisted in her seat to look through the rear window, her eyes locked on them, watching, calculating. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth. The knocking, the silence, the stares. It had all been a test. They weren't there to scare. They were hunting. The taillights bled red across the gravel as the car rolled backward, tires crunching with slow, deliberate weight. None of the teenagers moved. They stood rooted in the steam-filled chamber, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. Ethan felt Ryan tug at his sleeve. "They're leaving," his brother whispered, almost pleading, but Ethan didn't answer, because deep in his gut, he knew better. Predators don't simply leave, they circle, they wait. The car paused at the end of the narrow path, engine rumbling low, then eased forward into the black woods. Its headlights never turned on. The night swallowed it whole. Chloe broke the silence first. "We need to go." Now her voice cracked, too high-pitched, betraying her fear. Madison nodded furiously, clutching her damp towel as though it might shield her. The four of them gathered their things in trembling hands and shuffled toward the exit. Outside, the air was colder, the trees leaning close like eavesdroppers. Gravel shifted beneath their bare feet as they hurried across the lot. Ethan scanned the shadows, the empty spaces between the pines where anything could be hiding. The path back to the cabin stretched ahead, a tunnel of black, their phone flashlights weak against it. Every step felt too loud, every snap of a twig sounded like pursuit. Halfway down the path, Ryan whispered, "They were knocking to see if adults were inside." No one answered, but the words hung there, heavy, undeniable. The realization crawled through each of them. The couple hadn't chosen to reveal themselves because they'd been caught. They had been checking, testing, waiting for vulnerability. Chloe walked faster, her light jerking wildly across the dirt. Madison's lips moved in silent prayer. Ethan forced himself to stay calm, to keep them moving, but his chest burned with the thought, if we'd been alone, one by one, we'd be gone. Behind them, the forest exhaled. A faint sound carried on the damp wind, the low, guttural growl of an engine. Ethan froze. "Don't look back," he hissed. "Just run." They bolted. Towels flapped. Flashlights swung. Shadows fractured into chaos. The path blurred beneath their feet, but the sound grew louder. The hum of tires on dirt, the crunch of gravel, the slow stalk of something following. Chloe sobbed openly now. Madison gasped with each step. Ryan clung to Ethan's arm, nearly tripping as they broke through the last stretch of woods. The cabins appeared ahead, warm light spilling from the windows like salvation. They didn't stop until they burst inside, slamming the door shut, bolting the lock, pressing their backs to the wooden frame as if their bodies alone could hold back the night. Silence. Then, faintly, headlights swept across the cabin walls. A car had pulled into the lot outside. The beams lingered, crawling across the curtains before cutting out. The four of them clutched each other, barely breathing. Minutes passed, stretching into eternity. No knock came to the door, no footsteps on the porch, only the weight of unseen eyes pressing against the thin cabin walls. Finally, the sound of gravel again, retreating this time. The car pulled away, fading into the distance until the night reclaimed its stillness. No one spoke for the rest of the night. They lay awake in their bunks, listening to every creak of the cabin, every sigh of the trees, waiting for the engine to return. But it never did. When dawn came, the campground looked ordinary again. Families bustled, children ran laughing through the pines, and the sunlight made the horrors of the night seem almost like a dream. Almost. Ethan glanced at Ryan, at Chloe, at Madison. None of them smiled. Their faces were pale, drawn tight, shadows etched beneath their eyes. because they knew what had really happened. The knocking, the laughter, the way the woman's stare had lingered, measuring them like prey. It hadn't been chance. It had been hunting, and the four of them would carry that truth for the rest of their lives. Do you feel that? The silence after terror. It never feels clean. It clings. It breathes down your neck long after the danger has passed. That night, when the sun finally broke across the treetops, those four young souls thought they'd survived. And in a way they had. But survival is never the same as safety. Ethan, Ryan, Chloe, and Madison would never walk through a campground the same way again. Every creak of a cabin wall, every laugh that rings too sharp in the dark, every knock on a door they don't expect. It all became a reminder. Because the truth is, they hadn't escaped the woods. Not really. The woods had followed them home. What unsettled them most was not what had happened, but what had almost happened. The realization that the strangers outside those stalls had been testing, weighing, deciding if the children were alone. That knowledge gnawed at them far more than the knocking itself. It whispered to them, "Next time you may not be together. Next time the door might open. And tell me, my dear ones, what chills you more? The violence that happens, or the violence that almost does?" I know what chills me. The image of that car sitting silent with its headlights off. The woman's hair perfectly dry in the dripping night. The sound of her laugh, unnatural, jagged, like a knife scraping bone. And the stare, oh, the stare that lingered long enough to leave scars. No police report was filed. No names were ever spoken. To the rest of the world, it was nothing. Just a group of nervous kids scaring themselves in the dark. But we know better, don't we? We know the difference between nerves and danger. Some stories end with answers, but the most terrifying ones end with questions. Who were they? What did they want? And why? Did they choose to leave? Perhaps the couple decided the timing wasn't right. Perhaps they realized the children weren't as vulnerable as they'd hoped. Or perhaps they simply enjoy the hunt more than the kill. The waiting, the testing, the watching. Even now, when those four sit around a table and the story resurfaces, they fall silent before it ends. Because each of them still remembers that gaze through the rear window, that sense of being chosen and spared. And so they live with a truth most people never face. The world is not always filled with monsters in the woods, no. Sometimes the monsters drive cars. Sometimes they knock politely first. Sometimes they laugh as they walk away, knowing they'll never be caught, because their cruelty lives in the space between action and intent. That is why I share these tales with you, not to scare you with ghosts or shadows, but to remind you, the most dangerous thing you'll ever meet in the dark is another human being. So tonight, when you hear a knock at your door, late, unexpected, ask yourself, is it the wind? Is it a friend? Or is it someone testing, waiting, deciding whether you are alone? Lock your doors, draw your curtains, trust the silence, yes, but never too much. And remember Ethan, Ryan, Chloe, and Madison. Remember the knocking. Because there are people out there who are patient. People who laugh when you think they've gone. People who never truly leave. Until next time, my dear ones, sleep lightly. For the night is not always empty if this tale has stirred the shadows in your mind, my dear ones. Then stay with me. There are many more stories waiting, many more footsteps in the dark that you have not yet heard. So, if you dare, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and keep the lantern burning beside you. That way, you will never walk alone when I return with the next story. Until then, guard your doors, trust your instincts, and remember, night is never truly silent. This is Lizzie Bishop, bidding you good night and goodbye.